Welcome back to the Dynasty Rewind YouTube channel. My name is Bob, man, the IDP man. Today, I'm here to bring you my Week 2 IDP rankings in 2021 fantasy football. Let's get to it. Before we dive in, and I know it's cliche, I do got to say that not to take things that happened in Week 1 too seriously yet. A lot of these teams are still figuring things out. It's 1 week sample size. Looking at things through the lens of Week 1 is the worst way to identify how things are going to go the rest of the season. That being said, there are some players that I do have concerns with going on through the season. Players like Joe Schobert, not really standing out like you'd expect him to on a new team. And to me, when I was watching the game, it just kind of looked like he felt out of place, like he doesn't maybe really know the playbook yet there. Maybe he's just not in his own yet there. Whatever the case is, I'm a little concerned, but I'm not ready to like hit the eject button on the guy or really dump him in my rankings yet. I'd say the most concerning part of this is that Devin Bush went and had himself a really good game and really showed himself to be the more valuable IDP asset this week. Another guy that's going to hurt himself in my rankings if things don't change going forward is Tremaine Edmonds, Buffalo linebacker. And I mentioned this in my preseason rankings is that he's just a guy that doesn't really make those big splash plays. He's more of that reliable tackle floor. And that is something that is valuable, especially in like dynasty leagues. The guy's only 23 years old and he's put up 100 tackle seasons every season he's played so far. But with the fact that there's no impact plays alongside that doesn't really give him that big upside of a week. If you can look at having him as your linebacker 3, if things do not continue, because if he's only 23 in the league and he's going to be around for another 6, 7, 8 years, there is some value there, but it just depends on, how much you're really going to get out of him on a weekly basis. And then another guy I'm kind of concerned on is Jayon Brown, linebacker from Tennessee. And I think a lot of this is just kind of him getting back into his own, recovering from an injury, getting back up to game speed. He looks fine athletically, but just to be able to trust yourself to make tackles and things like that is obviously going to be something we need to monitor going forward. The final caveat I'll mention on those guys with red flags or concerns is that last year, the 3 teams they faced, the Bills, the Steelers, and the Cardinals, were 3 of the worst matchups for linebackers to face last year. So take everything with a grain of salt, but these are some things to monitor down the road. Now, on a more positive note, I would like to touch on some ascending players, some players that are going to be cracking these rankings sooner rather than later, and also, getting probably fairly high in the rankings as we go along. First player being would be Max Crosby, DL out of Las Vegas, and this guy looks just worlds better than he was last year. I'd say he even looks better than his rookie season when, he racked up 10 sacks as a 4th round drafted rookie. He seems faster, more tenacious, more after the ball. He was giving Lamar Jackson a run for his money and catching up to the guy. So I'm a big fan of Max Crosby, having a really cool story, battling alcohol addiction. Going forward, Max Crosby is probably going to be a guy that cracks my rankings more and more frequently, and probably getting pretty high up there as well as one of the quote unquote crown jewels of the Las Vegas Raiders defense. Another guy who seems to have found his home now in Carolina, Hassan Reddick, defensive lineman / linebacker, depending on the league setting you're in. Reuniting with his former college coach and Matt Rule really seems to have found a groove. And while he's been a really inconsistent player throughout his career, it seems like maybe he's got a hold on things. It'll obviously take time to develop down the track to see if he's developed in more of a consistent player or if he's still going to be those, really big boom weeks and then leave you wanting more of the weeks following. And then I know my buddy Mike will appreciate this one, shouting out Cole Holcomb of the Washington football team. And overall, as a note, I think we need to just chill out on the rookies. I just think they're, not in it yet. They're not really ready. The defensive rookies have not quite panned out. I think we all get rookie fever and we all get a little excited about these guys. And, false reports come out from the Cardinals saying Zaven Collins is going to start at Mike linebacker and play all the snaps and do all of the things. And then that doesn't come to fruition. Cole Holcomb looks like the linebacker to roster at this point in Washington. And while you should absolutely still hold on to Jamon Davis, you do need to be patient with the guy. It seems like there's still a big learning curve ahead. Now, this is a guy who might be ascending, but, I'm still not sold on him. He's more of a wash guy for me, and that's Jermaine Pratt. Last year, week 1 was the best week he had all season long, never really cracked the same tackle totals. This season, he comes back and actually has a bunch of impact plays along with his tackles. So I'm curious to see if Jermaine Pratt really does pay off. He did receive the Darius Leonard comp coming out, which I think is a little foolish considering Darius Leonard was a week 1 starter when he came out. He was a 2nd round pick. Very excited Colts team to have him. There was none of that similar hype. Darius Leonard had so much more production in college. albeit at a lower level school. But Jermaine Pratt, in my opinion, just had no right to have that label put on him. So I think it's more of an unfair comp as opposed to the player just not living up to expectations. And the last player that I think is ascending, and this is a guy we really wanted to break out last year or continue to break out, and that's Tracy Walker, DB on the Lions, seeming to be, obviously out of that Matt Patricia doghouse. Didn't seem to really, after week 2, I think it was when he got injured, never really got back to full-time playing. And I think now with this new regime coming in, the defensive back coach from New Orleans coming over to play DC, I think all of these things are playing a huge role for him. Being healthy, having a defensive back coach for a coordinator obviously helps as well. And then being just in a new scheme on what is still a pretty bad defense, I think the grass is turning out to be a lot greener in this system for Tracy Walker. Really quick before I do hop into the rankings, I do hope y'all consider subscribing to the channel. We're bringing you a weekly rewind, a weekly waiver wire, a weekly dynasty update from our podcast, this IDP rankings video on a weekly basis, as well as weekly starts and sits. And if y'all really want, I'll even do a Sunday prop special for y'all over on Underdog Fantasy. But that is it for that. Let's hop to the rankings. So here we are with the 2021 Week 2 IDP rankings for fantasy football. While I'm only touching on the top 36 IDP rankings in this video, you can feel free to use the link in the description box below. That'll take you to my full list of rankings over at Fantasy Six Pack. Those are completely free, no strings attached. You can just check out the full list there. If you don't see anybody you like on this list, I can almost guarantee you they're probably on the list over there. And there are a lot of players that are really good that I really like that just didn't make the top 36. But so nothing crazy here that I really want to touch on. Some players that I do want to touch on, however, Zach Cunningham, obviously not getting the reps that you would like to see out of Zach Cunningham, not getting Zach Cunningham numbers. And I think a lot of that is Christian Kirksey does seem to be eating into his workload a bit. Christian Kirksey had himself a week, racked up a ton of tackles, did his thing. Zach Cunningham did his thing. It was also a game where they were throwing a ton. The passing breakdown of this game was like 51 passes to 14 rush attempts. It was something ridiculous like that. So, not having the ball on the ground and having those deep passes a lot from Trevor Lawrence that went incomplete anyway just really didn't help give Zach Cunningham much of an opportunity or much of a floor to really make many plays. So I'm not too concerned going forward. He's going against Cleveland, who was a very favorable matchup for linebackers last year. So not too concerned at this point. Another guy where if he has, 4 or 5 more weeks like this, obviously he's going to continue to drop in rankings. Jamal Adams was another player who just really didn't do a whole heck of a lot in his game. A big part of this, I think, is that the Colts have such a good offensive line that even when Jamal Adams is blitzing, he's not going to find a way around that offensive line. They scheme things up so well that it's really hard to get to the quarterback there. And then for the plays that he might have dropped into coverage, a lot of throws went to the running back as opposed to maybe a wide receiver cutting over the field. Just under 50% of targets went to the running back position in this game. So just not a lot of available work for Jamal Adams to really get in and do his thing. Heading into a much more favorable matchup against Tennessee, that offensive line is beaten and bruised. So I'm looking forward to a bigger game this week from him. Now, we already touched on Joe Schobert. Again, just kind of concerned, give him a few weeks. He'll probably start to drop in my rankings if it continues. Las Vegas, a little more favorable of a matchup for linebackers, in my opinion, but could still be getting his feet wet in that playbook and getting used to things. It could just be that Devin Bush is the linebacker to roster on this team, and maybe he needs to be in this top 12 of IDP rankings. Speaking of linebackers to roster on the same team, Isaiah Simmons really stood out, obviously ahead of Zaven Collins. Until further notice, it's Isaiah Simmons is the linebacker here that you want, period. No questions about it, no doubt about it. And whatever Arizona wants to try to say about their bogus pushing Zaven Collins, that he's going to be the guy, he's going to be our starting Mike linebacker. Bogus. I'm done with you guys. That is absolute trash. You guys did us dirty. So until we start seeing those snaps change, I'm not willing to really touch Zaven Collins. I like to leave him on my bench at all costs. Same with Jordan Hicks, just not really worth bumping into my lineup for any reason, unless it's like the deepest of deep leagues. He didn't really do a whole heck of a lot either with his workload. Neither did Zaven Collins. Isaiah Simmons is the only linebacker I really want to touch here until further notice. Somebody we got to talk about here is Chandler Jones, DL. I don't think he's going to put up 5 sacks every single week of the season, but if he has a chance to do it again, it's definitely going to be against Minnesota's beaten and battered offensive line as well. So I like him a lot this week. Probably a little higher than most, maybe higher than most. I don't know. Some people might be a little more reactionary than I am and are fine with putting him in their top 12. He's my DL2 this week against like I said, a weak Minnesota offensive line. Kind of already touched on Tremaine Edmonds. Like I said, he's going to continue to fall down my ranks more than likely if things don't change. I do value floor players, but I value floor players that like consistently do make those impact plays that really put you over the top on any given week. And Tremaine Edmonds just doesn't do that for you. Like I said, he's probably good. He's probably better as an LB3. I'm not ready to bail. I'm giving him one last crack, maybe a couple more cracks at being that guy. But if that doesn't change, this week or sooner rather than later, I'm probably going to be out on the guy. He probably won't make the top 36 again. And I know there's going to be people that are probably pushing back heavy on that. And like, unless you're in a super tackle heavy scoring league, Tremaine Edmonds just ain't going to be a guy for you because most leagues reward those impact plays more than those tackles significantly. So to me, he's just not going to be a guy I really want on my team. Like I said, LB3, probably fine. He's listed here as an LB2, so a little high for my liking, but it is what it is at this point. Like I said, giving the dude a chance, see if he breaks out, see if he does something with getting those impact plays done. Another player I want to touch on that I was kind of thinking might be kind of a blah player this year, and that's Fred Warner, linebacker out of San Francisco. And I think that part of this could be that with Robert Salah moving on to New York, that maybe he doesn't have the same coaching that can keep him with a scheme of coverage that can prevent him from ball carriers getting the ball in the first place or even getting targeted. And now being on a worse overall defense just kind of puts him in more of a position to make plays and show out for your fantasy team. So Fred Warner could be somebody that I'm kind of going to warm up on over the season. It kind of depends on how it all shakes out. Well, I'm not willing to say that Derwin James is like fully back in action. He's still a very good player. Showed that he's pretty healthy. While he didn't have a blow up game by any stretch of the imagination, he did have a solid game, wasn't terrible by any stretch. So a guy I'm pretty confident slotting in as a safety one, ideally a safety two, if maybe you had to make those changes or adjustments while he was out, that maybe you were able to pick up a safety one. If he can be your two, I'm all the happier with it, but I do think he carries a ton of upside on a weekly basis and somebody who can really change a game for you, make plays, the whole 9 yards. So having already touched on Jayon Brown, I do want to touch on Shaq Thompson. I think a lot of people are going to maybe get a little overhyped after his week one explosive game. And this is one of those players I'm not willing to overreact to. He's been in the league for a long time. His time to really like break out has kind of come and gone. So I think this is more of an outlier game for him. And albeit it's like the biggest outlier maybe we've ever seen from a player who just hasn't really had a ton of production in his career. Like, he's a fine player, don't get me wrong, but he's just never been that blow up guy who can give you an awesome week in, week out. So I'm not holding my breath when it comes to this guy putting up another, 30-point league, depending on your scoring settings. He's all over the place depending on scoring. He's not a guy I'm willing to put into my LB1 territory. He's an LB2 on this list. I think that's more than fair for a guy that's been pretty bland for most of his career. Steady, but not anybody, again, that's kind of like a Tremaine Edmonds, who's just not putting up those big impact play numbers that you'd like to see out of a guy. And moving on to another player I'd like to discuss, Kenneth Murray, linebacker from the Los Angeles Chargers. And he was a player I pegged as a breakout. I think his situation is beautiful this year. I think, him coming into his second season, when last year he obviously showed signs of struggling adapting to the next level of the NFL. Coming in with a new defensive-minded head coach in Brandon Staley, somebody who, turned Troy Reeder and Micah Kaiser into worthwhile linebackers. Now with Brandon Staley given somebody with an actual pedigree, really seems to be like a perfect situation for Kenneth Murray to thrive. And he's going to be somebody that I think is going to be able to rise up this list as the season goes on. And then the last player I really want to touch on, Minkah Fitzpatrick, safety versus Las Vegas. Derek Carr had a lot of errant throws on Monday Night Football, and Minkah Fitzpatrick had a ton of plays where he was around the ball and probably could have walked away with 3 interceptions in that game if he was just a little bit more on top of it. And I really don't think he's going to let Derek Carr make those same mistakes and get away with them in this game. I think that pass rush is going to be just as similar to how the Ravens were at points in the game where that offensive line could just not keep up. And I think TJ Watt is going to be eating Alex Leatherwood alive in this game. And while that is it for the IDP rankings, I do hope you let me know in the comments below if you prefer this method where I just kind of touch on a few players, or if you prefer last week's method where I touch on every single player in my top 36. Let me know in the comments below. I'd really appreciate it. Now that we're done with the rankings, I do want to bring you my Thursday Night Football prediction. As you can see on the board back here, I do have the Washington football team winning 20-15. Pretty low scoring affair. I think both these defenses are pretty solid. So I'm not really willing to bet that either of these teams are going to blow up by any means. I also think both their offenses are not great either. But along with these predictions, I did want to shout out today's sponsor and bring you some of my favorite underdog fantasy pick'ems for Thursday night football. I was lucky enough to win $100 on a bet this weekend in these rival pick'ems, and these are easily my favorite. I like these a lot more than the over under. These rival pick'ems are pretty simple. You take whatever the stat is and basically put these two players against each other and just kind of go from there and see how the game unfolds. The one small note with these rival pick'ems, if you have any with the same players in them, you can't do another with the same players in them. So like I can't do this fantasy points one and this interceptions one. I won't be able to do the Antonio Gibson one and the Taylor Heineke one, but I do want to bring you my favorite ones from this game. I'm going to add 5 picks or as many as I can. I'm not sure if I can do 5, but as many as I can with a $5 entry amount with a total of a $100 payout if you want to bet alongside me. So I know the first bet that I really want to make is going to be the Antonio Gibson receiving yards. JD McKissick got 1 target last week, and I don't think he did anything with it. So that's a pretty easy bet for me. When it comes to receiving yards between Kenny Golladay and Terry McLaurin, I'm going to side with Terry McLaurin. Really only the wide receiver option on that team, in my opinion. Kenny Golladay didn't get a lot of love. He got the least targets out of all the receivers on that team, or at least the relevant ones, i.e. Darius Slayton and Sterling Shepard. So I'm pretty comfortable rolling with Terry McLaurin there. When it comes to receptions, I think I'm going to go ahead and side with Sterling Shepard here. Got a lot of work, looked really, really good last week. Could have just been a slacking Denver defense, but Sterling Shepard looked really good. Number 3 Sterling Shepard looked a heck of a lot better than number 87 Sterling Shepard. Then I'm going to target the longest reception here, and I'm going to go Darius Slayton. You know, Diami Brown didn't get a whole lot of work. I think he had 2 targets and didn't catch either of them. I just think that Darius Slayton is going to catch at least 1 long ball in this game. And then I just need to make 1 more pick to complete my multiplier. I'm really torn between the fantasy points and the interceptions with these 2 guys. If I went interceptions, I'd pick Daniel Jones. But I'm also leaning, if it was fantasy points, I think I'd also lean Daniel Jones, just the rushing upside and stuff like that. But I'm going to go ahead and do the interceptions and roll with Daniel Jones. And I'm going to put in my $5 bet. And I'm going to submit. And as easy as that, your boy is in it to win it. And if you want to get in on all the fun with me over at Underdog Fantasy, you can use this promo code right here. When you make your first deposit, you get a $10 kickback match, or you can always use the link in the description box below. Support the channel. We really appreciate you. Get over there. It is a blast. I hope to see you there. But like I said, that is it for the IDP rankings video. I do hope you all enjoyed. If you did enjoy, please leave a like. Check out the other videos on the channel. Let me know what you think of this format. I hope you all enjoyed. That is it for me today. I hope you all have a great week too. Y'all have a good one.